nightmares.
I had 46 cameras in that bunker. Thermal, panoramic, motion-triggered. Every corridor, airlock, dormitory, hallway, and stairwell was covered, except the one place that mattered when it all fell apart. Sector 3. That was where my wife and our sons were assigned after the first containment breach. That was where they were moved when Navarro told me the rest of the levels were too exposed. That was the last place their access cards pinged before everything went silent. And that was the one place I never got footage from again. She said it was a system fault. Circuit fault on loop 6. Nothing serious. We're running diagnostics. I heard those words while I stood in the command room, watching 5 empty screens cycle to static. I stared at those grey bars for 6 hours, thinking maybe the feed would refresh, that the red icons would vanish and I would see one of my sons wave toward a camera. But the red stayed red. Then the power dropped in the eastern corridor. Half the lights died at once. Navarro called it a surge from the auxiliary batteries, told me to sit tight, told me it would stabilize. She always had something prepared, just enough logic to delay panic, just enough calm to feel almost rehearsed. I didn't understand what was happening until the vault door sealed behind me. I was headed toward the comm room when the lockdown protocol triggered. Every blast panel slammed shut at once. And in the middle of it, Navarro was there, on the other side of the viewing glass. No headset, no explanation, just her and 2 guards, both armed. She didn't say a word, didn't offer a single line of the usual damage control, just turned, keyed in an override code on the side panel, and locked me in. I still remember the sound of that code, 6 fast taps followed by 2 long. Not a misclick, not accidental. She knew exactly what she was doing. I hit the glass, yelled for her to turn around. I told her the feeds had restored, that I needed to check Sector 3. She didn't look back. The 2 guards shifted uncomfortably, like they didn't understand what they were part of either. One of them kept glancing at her. I thought maybe he would stop her. Maybe he didn't know she was planning to abandon me. But then, she pulled the manual release on the emergency shaft and the panel opened. Just for her. Just enough space for 3 bodies to squeeze through and vanish into the maintenance tunnels. I tried to override the lock. I still had system admin control for another 40 seconds before her code severed the permissions. Then it all went dark. The screens, the lights, the fail-safes. Everything she did was deliberate. She left me down there because she believed I was already dead. Infected, compromised, irrational, whatever word she had filed under my name by then. She made a call and stuck to it. I clawed at that door until my hands bled. I screamed so loud my voice cracked. I begged. I cursed her. None of it mattered. All I had left was silence. A dead panel, and the unbearable thought that my sons had died screaming in Sector 3 while I sat staring at static. I wasn't even allowed the truth of how they died. I had to imagine it, frame by frame, in the dark. And now, I know that she did see it, that she was monitoring it in real time from her private backup terminal, tucked behind a sealed partition in her quarters. I found the logs weeks later, archived, encrypted, incomplete. But enough. She saw what happened to them. She watched the last working camera in Sector 3, heard the screams through the mic feed, saw my wife trying to bar the inner door, and she let it happen. She deleted the evidence, blamed a corrupted codec, and walked away. I stayed inside the vault chamber for 3 hours. I kept checking the override, assuming this was part of a secondary plan. I even tried the backup radio on Channel 9. No return signal. She had cut that too. So I broke the security panel, crawled into the ventilation crawl space, and made my way 2 levels down through the filtration shaft. The lights still worked. No alarm had ever triggered. There was no breach, no infected, no emergency. She lied. She staged it. And if there was any doubt, I lost it the moment I found the side corridor scrubbed. Not just abandoned, sanitized, cleaned of gear, records, tags, anything that could be traced. She had been planning this for days, maybe longer. I surfaced through the tertiary drain on the north slope, soaked, freezing, half-starved. Snow had already begun to fall again, The sky was low and slate-colored. I looked back at the slope and pictured the rooms beneath. My wife's quarters. The rec hall where my sons used to argue over films. The secondary clinic where I spent nights doing my own diagnostics while everyone else slept. It was all gone. Every memory I had of that place was tainted now. Navarro's last transmission, recorded 6 hours before she sealed me in, claimed Sector 3 had been breached. That exposure was probable. That fatalities were expected. She named my wife. She named both sons. She filed it cold, brief, technical. That was the only report I found when I reached the uplink cache near the old ranger post. Just enough data to crush what was left of me. From that moment on, nothing else mattered. I stopped caring about the condition of the roads, the weather, the broadcast warnings. The world was dead. Navarro had walked away with my last reason to care about it. She took the secure drive, the fallback map, and my family's names. I followed her because I had nothing else to do but catch the one person who made that choice for me. I didn't hunt. I took. I didn't camp. I occupied whatever space gave me roof and view. I didn't ask survivors for help. I didn't want their stories, their version of loss. They weren't mine to care about. I slept on loading docks, inside hollowed vehicles, beneath porch roofs that smelled of mildew and gasoline. I crossed through towns already stripped of anything useful. No moving cars, no fuel, just carcasses of a civilization already too soft to hold itself together. In 3 separate places, I found supplies with our original inventory stamps, Navy crates marked with the Hale Foundation seal. That meant she was trading assets, maybe using what I left behind to build herself a new safe zone. She didn't burn our name. She rebranded it, passed it off to whoever offered her security. I saw infected, dozens, but I stopped reacting to them like threats. They weren't predators. They were noise, decay and motion. One came at me while I was siphoning water from a cracked fire hydrant, an older woman, barefoot, still wearing part of a volunteer rescue jacket. I knocked her down with a shovel and kept hitting until her skull gave way. I didn't stop to look at her face. She could have been anyone. 2 weeks into my search, I found a man still alive. Military jacket, not one of mine. Claimed he knew her. Said Navarro passed through a western checkpoint, alone, heading toward the Redwood Basin. I asked where she went next. He tried to dodge. I pressed a bolt cutter to his leg and broke his knee. Then he gave me the rest. An old cold storage depot in the valley, rigged for short-term occupancy. She had met someone there, left again after 3 days. I didn't feel guilt for what I did to him, not even when he begged, not even when I walked away without bandaging his leg. This wasn't revenge. This was what was left of logic. I checked every signal path, every relay beacon she might have used. No hits, nothing broadcast, but she was still moving, still trading. That meant she was not trying to disappear. She was trying to build something new, and that made her careless. I killed 3 more infected near the water treatment station where Navarro once claimed she had built out a secondary outpost. None of them were fresh. None turned fast. All of them had the look of long-term rot. That meant she had been through, but not recently. I wasn't worried. I could feel it narrowing. Her paths were shrinking. The world was smaller now, and Navarro had already shown her hand. She would use familiar roads, former allies, trusted caches. That made her traceable. I didn't write anything down. I didn't keep maps. I remembered the terrain, the smells, the choices she made years ago. Every hesitation, every favor she owed. I followed her like a second skin she had shed too slowly. The forest past the ridge had burned weeks ago, maybe longer. Snow sat on top of ash, and the air stank of wet stone and soot. I crossed through what used to be part of the Northern Trail network. Navarro had done a short survival course out here with 4 logistics officers 2 winters ago. They barely made it through without assistance. She wasn't a field operator. She was command, but she trusted the woods, and that meant something. If she was cutting between collapsed zones, she would go where the infected were thinner and patrols were rare. By day 30, I had narrowed her corridor to under 30 square miles. Not because I was guessing, because I understood the pace she moved. Navarro did not improvise. She calculated risk, stockpiled fallback points, and never returned to the same supply stash twice unless it was already covered. She kept 3 days of gear on her. No more. So wherever she had gone, she had resupplied nearby. I found the wreckage of an armored personnel carrier buried behind a collapsed school gymnasium. Half the building had crushed its roof. It wasn't hers, but it carried Hale Foundation markings. A former escort team, maybe one of the units she redirected during the early days of collapse. I checked the inside. 2 skeletonized corpses in flak vests, burned skin, gasoline poured over their backs. One still had his helmet fused to his skull. That wasn't random. That was cleanup. Someone didn't want the dead identifiable. Not by me. I took the map case from the wall bracket and laid it out across the hood of a half-melted vehicle. It had only one notation added after the original issue date. A red square around a farmhouse west of the river crossing, maybe 2 hours out by foot. Navarro had used it once, years back. There had been a reclusive fixer there, a private armorer who kept to himself and refused Foundation contracts. She had gotten along with him, paid him in antibiotics. I folded the map, started walking. There were 4 infected in the ravine beneath the bridge, none of them fresh. 2 had shattered femurs and dragged themselves like slugs across the snow. I dropped a rock on the first, hit the second with the edge of a crowbar. I didn't waste ammo. The third got close, jaw twisted out, both eyes gone. It made no sound, just moved fast for something half collapsed. I knocked it off balance and pinned it under the railing beam until it stopped twitching. The last stayed at the far end. I left it there. It wasn't in my way. I reached the farmhouse by nightfall. Broken windows, cold chimney, wind rattling an empty bucket line. No movement. I circled it once. Found one set of tracks behind the barn. Boot prints wider than Navarro's. Male, carrying weight, maybe armed. Inside, I found him half frozen near a pile of empty cans. Shotgun still across his lap. Not infected, not aggressive, just old, sick. He didn't even raise the weapon. "You're here for her," he said. I said nothing. She came through 10 days back, alone. Asked for bolt cutters, duct tape, and a list of chemicals I didn't have. "What else?" I asked. He shook his head, coughing into a towel stained with yellow-brown streaks. "She took what she could, left me half a bottle of antibiotics, said she wouldn't be back." He didn't lie. His hands were shaking from fever. No strength left to resist. I asked for the direction she left. He pointed east. I gave him water and took the extra gloves he had in his trunk. He wasn't going to need them long. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. I knew what the bolt cutters were for. Navarro wasn't breaking into compounds. She was cutting chains, maybe opening old storage, old holding pens. Places I had ordered sealed off years ago when our contractors went rogue or stopped reporting. We had dozens of those across the northern stretch. Navarro had access to every location code. If she was looking to disappear completely, she had every tool she needed. But that wasn't her goal. She wasn't running. She was assembling something, building a perimeter, probably trying to restart a private command structure. She would need fuel, power, shelter, and personnel. And she would need to keep it off-grid. That gave me a place to start. She wouldn't hide in a city. She hated cities. She hated civilians too. She wouldn't shelter in a large camp where control was shared. She'd go underground, or remote, or buried in cold storage. 3 days later, I followed smoke to a power station west of the basin. The grid was dead, but the backup turbines had been reactivated. That required access codes, Hale Foundation codes. She had used our master switch override. That meant she had one of the drive keys I assumed burned, maybe from the central office or from one of the roving command caches. Only Navarro would have known where I left those. I didn't rush in. I waited through 2 full rotations. Watched a truck come and go. Old military frame, modified suspension, no plates, 2 men on board. neither one I recognized. They dropped off a crate of canisters and left with empty ones. Probably trade fuel. They didn't look like infected. Didn't behave like desperate survivors either. That meant Navarro was recruiting. That meant she was selling something, or promising safety. I followed them, through night and snow and frozen back roads. I found their trail again at an overpass checkpoint rigged with motion cameras. That wasn't Navarro's style. That was someone else. Someone tech-oriented, maybe part of the Eastern Engineering Corps. One of the people Navarro used to ignore during briefings. Someone she probably now depended on. The checkpoint was unmanned when I arrived. I disabled the camera with a gloved hand and broke the junction box open with a hammer, took out the relay chip. Inside was a set of transcribed voice logs. I recognized Navarro's voice instantly. "Proceed to Point Bravo," she said. "Crates 3 and 4 are for secondary filtration only. Keep the others sealed. We'll offload at Site 3 once we've cleared the ridge. No contact with locals. No flag. No broadcast. I repeat, no broadcast." That was 2 days ago. She was close. I moved through the ridgeline by moonlight. Every noise was magnified. Every branch snap. Every dry footfall in the frost. I stayed low, carried a flashlight in my coat but never turned it on. I knew how these people moved. Quiet, controlled, risk-averse. She wouldn't tolerate panic. Not after what happened in the bunker. If she believed I was dead, she would feel safe. That gave me room. Site 3 turned out to be a reinforced lodge at the edge of a glacial cut, camouflaged with tarps and snow netting. 2 figures stood outside with scoped rifles. Both wore the emblem of the 2nd Auxiliary Relief Team, men we trained to assist with logistics, not enforcement. She had retrained them. That meant she was keeping structure, discipline. She still believed in command. I watched them rotate shifts, mark their intervals, then moved in during the handoff gap. Quiet. No sound. Took the first one with a steel pipe to the throat. He folded fast, gurgled once. I pulled his weapon and moved through the side corridor. The second never saw me. I snapped his neck while he was pissing against the wall. No hesitation. I dragged both bodies out of view and checked them for anything useful. Keys, a lighter, a half-used map someone had drawn over in pen, marking a supply cache farther west. Nothing I needed now. I stuffed the lighter in my jacket and took the handgun from the second one's holster. It was a 9mm with a cracked rear sight, but it cycled clean. The spare mag was loose in his coat. I kept that too. I followed the hallway toward the rear structure. The doors were reinforced plywood over metal frames. Nothing a battering ram could not handle, but they gave the illusion of stability. One of them opened into a dimly lit room, the kind of place that used to be a control hub before the grid failed. Radios, batteries, water storage, an old desk. Navarro wasn't there, but her bag was, her coat, a still warm coffee tin set on a heating plate wired to a solar cell. I waited inside that room, behind the door, sat in silence, checked my watch every couple of minutes. She came back alone, carrying a half-full jerry can. I let her close the door behind her before I stepped out of the shadow and fired. Both rounds went into her legs, one in the thigh, the other through the outside of the calf. She dropped instantly, screamed once and bit it back. No time to beg. I crossed the floor fast and kicked the pistol out of her reach. She looked up at me, stunned. There was blood soaking into the concrete under her. She pressed her hands to the wounds. Not to fight, just to hold herself together. She recognized me instantly. "You're alive?" she rasped. I didn't answer. I dragged a chair over from the corner, threw it down behind her, and yanked her up into it by the arm. She howled when I set her weight on her shattered leg, but I didn't care. I wrapped a belt around the chair and her chest. Tight, another across her legs. I didn't rush. She didn't try to stop me. I crouched down in front of her, resting the pistol on my knee. No emotion on my face. No relief. No rage. Just focus. "You left us all to die," I said. You thought wrong. You sealed the door. You and your men took what mattered and left. No message. No call sign. You locked the system. You left a man inside while his family screamed behind a bulkhead. She closed her eyes. I thought you were dead. I thought they were dead. They are now, I said flatly. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Her mouth twitched once. Then she nodded. You're right. I did it. I made that call. I stood up, stepped around the back of her, let her hear the pacing, the hard footsteps, the scrape of my boot against the floor. She kept breathing sharp, shallow. Her skin had gone pale, probably bleeding too fast. I didn't care. You know what it looked like, I said, still behind her. My son's room, his drawing still on the wall, one shoe under the bed, blood in the corner. One of your men tried to seal off the hallway but failed. I found his body too. I made the wrong call, she said again. I did what I thought would stop the spread. You have every right. Don't, I cut in. Don't tell me what I have. You don't get to narrate this. You don't get to explain. I circled back around and looked her in the face. She couldn't meet my eyes. Her face had thinned. She looked tired but not sick, not starving. She'd done well. Too well. You had backups, other shelters. You didn't even pause after leaving. You had a contingency plan. That's why you took the case. I did what I was trained to do. You weren't trained to betray your team. No, she said quietly, but I did. She tilted her head, winced, and looked up at me again. You want me to beg? Scream? Tell you I was wrong? I don't care what you say, I replied. I didn't come here for apologies. I came to bury you. She blinked. Then why am I still alive? Because I need to understand one thing, I said. Why? Why abandon the bunker when you knew some of us were still inside? Why lock the system? Why leave with the safe? She sighed. Because Martin, it was never about saving people. It was about containing data, information. The moment one section was compromised, protocol said seal and move on, and you know that. You wrote the logistics on some of those fallback policies. You don't want to remember it, but you were part of it. I designed backup protocols, not betrayal, I said. You designed a bunker for people you never expected to survive, she whispered. The silence that followed was heavy. I stood in it, let it work through me. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel anything. I just felt the time, how much of it had passed, how much had gone to waste, how long I had blamed her, how much I still did. I thought Liam was dead, she said finally. I heard him cry out during the breach. I saw blood on the floor. I thought everyone inside was gone or turning. So I locked the sector. I sealed it. And I left. I let that sit. I didn't speak again. I just looked at her, measured how long she had left. She was sweating more now, shock setting in. I'd need to cauterize those wounds if I planned to keep her upright. I had no such plans. I left the room for a moment, found her radio, thumbed through the presets. She hadn't called anyone for at least a day. I flipped the channel to something open and walked back to her. I held the radio in front of her face, letting the hiss of static fill the room. The receiver picked up nothing, just empty noise carrying through the cold air. I told her to pick a channel she knew someone still monitored. She hesitated, either because of pain or because she understood what using it meant. Then she reached for the dial with a trembling hand, elbow scraping across the armrest as she leaned forward. She found a frequency that wasn't dead, one that crackled with faint movement, like someone far away had their equipment running, but wasn't talking. I told her plainly that she wasn't calling for help. She was calling to confess, to speak into the air what she had been doing since day one, to admit who she worked for, to talk about the psychological models she built using real people as subjects, including my family. I told her she owed it. Not for me, for the entire mess she made. I didn't care if no one heard it. I just wanted her to say it while her mind was still clear. She gritted her teeth when she shifted again. The wounds in her legs were darkening, blood thick around the belt I had tied to keep her from slipping out of the chair. Her skin had gone grey, and sweat gathered on her forehead in uneven patches. She stared at the radio like it was something alive, something she wasn't sure she could face. When she finally pressed the button, her hand shook badly. "This is Dr. Navarro," she said. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "If anyone is tracking Site 4, cut it off. The project is compromised. Behavioral data is no longer viable. All models are to be considered contaminated." Her finger slipped. The radio beeped. I lifted it closer to her mouth again. "Keep talking," I said quietly. "Tell the truth." She swallowed hard, jaw tightening, eyes half closed. "I worked under the Continuity Directive," she said, "signed by the National Emergency Board. My role was psychological assessment during prolonged lockdown, group behavior, survival compliance, escalation mapping. I wasn't hired to protect clients. I was hired to document what happened to them." She took a long breath, one that rattled. Sector 3 failed faster than expected. Exposure spread through the lower halls. One staff member lied about a bite. Containment collapsed. The directive said if core systems were compromised, priority shifted to data extraction and project survival. I followed it. Her voice weakened. She pressed the button again. "I left Hale alive because I believed he was already lost. I believed his family was gone. I believed no one in A16 would survive." I asked her why she didn't check, why she didn't confirm, why she looked me in the eyes before locking the door. She didn't look up at me. She stared at the far wall, as if watching something replay in her mind. "I was afraid," she whispered, "not of death, of the failure being traced to me, of the board deciding I was responsible for the collapse. The drive from your safe was the only leverage I had left. Without it, I would have been discarded." I didn't say anything. I didn't nod. I didn't move. I just watched her. She continued because she knew there was nowhere else for it to go. "The psychological models weren't for crisis response," she said. "They were for prediction, long-term. What people do when order disappears. What groups become. How fast trust decays. How resources change behavior. Your bunkers were ideal environments, closed systems, no outside influence, perfect for tracking collapse in stages." She shifted again and winced. One of her wounds had soaked through the belt and was dripping onto the cold floor. She didn't bother to check how bad it was. She knew. "Your family, your staff, your guards." She paused, eyes unfocused. "I logged them. I watched behaviors during scarcity, during panic. I didn't lie about what I saw. I did my job exactly as instructed." The hatred that rose in me wasn't a sudden flare. It was a slow, steady current that had been building since the day she sealed the blast door. But now it wasn't heat. It wasn't rage. It was cold recognition. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't a rebel. She wasn't insane. She was compliant. Loyal to a system that didn't deserve loyalty. A system I helped design, without knowing what the other half had planned. She pressed the button again. "If anyone hears this, shut the project down. It's over. There is no predictive order left. Everything we collected is corrupted by external collapse." The radio hissed. No response. The silence made something settle inside her. Maybe relief. Maybe resignation. She let go of the device. It dropped onto the concrete and rolled toward my foot. She looked up at me and spoke plainly. "You were supposed to survive that day. You were the one person we thought would keep order. But you froze. You argued. You hesitated. And everything spiraled. I made the assumption that you died in the breach. I didn't check the lower vents. I didn't check the auxiliary cams. I didn't confirm anything. I just ran." Her breath hitched. She blinked slowly. "I failed you. I failed the board. I failed the project. And I failed myself." There was no apology in her tone, no pleading, no excuses, just a tired, collapsing honesty that came too late to matter. I stood there in silence. I didn't threaten her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind her again about my wife or my sons. She knew, and she knew what it meant now that she had said everything out loud. Her breathing became uneven. She was leaning forward, arms limp, blood running down both legs. She wasn't going to last much longer. I wasn't sure if shock or blood loss would take her first. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She had gone oddly calm. "You told me," I said quietly. "Now you can die with it out." She didn't respond. Her eyes moved toward the radio again, then to the door, then closed halfway. She tried to speak once more, but her voice came out thin and indistinct. Whatever she said was swallowed by the static. I stayed in the room. I didn't turn away. I didn't rush her. I didn't try to finish her off. I wanted to see her end the way she left others. Alone, with the truth sitting next to her and nothing left to rely on. She leaned back and let her head fall against the chair. It took longer than I thought. She didn't fight. She barely moved. When her chest stopped rising, I waited another full minute just to be sure. Her face didn't change. No final twitch, no last words. She just went still. The belt straps and the blood-soaked fabric were the only things left holding her upright. I sat on the floor across from her, back against the wall, legs stretched out. I didn't feel a sense of victory, no satisfaction, no relief. I didn't feel anything at all. The room smelled of iron and fuel, and the radio kept letting out soft bursts of static, like someone was adjusting a dial far away. I didn't know what to do next. The world outside was dead. The bunker under the resort was filled with ghosts. My family was gone. The project was meaningless. And the woman who ruined everything had bled out in a chair in front of me. I stayed slumped on the concrete until my neck stiffened and my legs numbed. My eyes kept drifting toward Navarro's body, but I couldn't get myself to move closer or farther. There was nothing left to say to her, nothing left to hear. I had done what I came here to do, and the room felt empty in a way that didn't make sense yet. Revenge was supposed to give direction. It didn't. It only stripped away the last task I had been clinging to. I kept replaying a single stupid thought. Go home. Not to the bunker under the resort. Not to the mountain. To California. To the house that still held the old photos. The small furniture dents. The worn carpet on the stairs. The storage shed full of the equipment I trusted more than any bunker built by a committee. I had a secondary depot there, separate from the continuity directive. My wife never cared about it. My sons didn't even know it existed. It was supposed to be just another quiet investment. One of the few things in my life not touched by the project. I told myself I could walk the rest of my time there. No purpose, no expectations. Just finish whatever was left of my life on ground that once meant something. There was nothing heroic or noble in it. I had no one left to protect. No one waiting. No plan beyond movement. The country was broken. Fuel stations were empty. Roads were blocked. But I could still follow the map burned into memory from a lifetime of business trips up and down the coast. The adrenaline that had been holding me together finally ran out. My body shut down faster than I expected. I thought I would stay alert, pacing the room, checking the hallways. Instead, I leaned back against the wall, stretched my legs out, and drifted into a heavy, forced sleep. It wasn't restful. It didn't ease anything. It was the kind of unconsciousness that feels more like being turned off than falling asleep. I must have dropped for an hour or two, maybe longer. Hard to know. When I woke, it wasn't from a dream. It was from noise. A sharp scrape, a wooden crack. Then a dry dragging sound across the floor. I pushed myself upright, hands cold, head throbbing. Navarro's chair had tipped over. The belt straps were twisted, and her fingers were clawing weakly at the concrete. Her eyes were open, cloudy. Her mouth hung in an uneven gape, jaw clicking with each strained movement. Her legs didn't work anymore. Her body twitched in short, jerky motions. She wheezed. Not breathing, not alive. Just pushing air through a ruined throat. I stared at her without moving. She had died hours earlier. I watched it. She had never been bitten. She had not been exposed to anything as far as I knew. I checked her for breaks in the skin when I tied the belt. Nothing. She had bled to death. That was supposed to be the end of it. She reached toward my boot, fingers scraping the floor in short bursts. Her face twisted as she tried to bite at the air. There was no intelligence in the movements, no awareness, just the same emptiness I had seen in the infected that tore through the lower sector of the bunker. Slow, weak, but present. My first instinct was confusion, not fear. I just watched her try to pull herself across the concrete, dragging what remained of her strength through the floor dust. Her jaw snapped open again and again. The sound was shallow, hollow, stripped of any human rhythm. She wasn't alive, and yet she was animated with the same persistence I had spent months trying to outrun. I stepped back and pressed a hand against the wall. I didn't feel my pulse climb or my breath race. I felt calculation. She hadn't been bitten. She hadn't been exposed. She had only died, and something inside her had restarted whatever process the infected carried. That meant the virus didn't only spread through bites, or that exposure was far easier than we assumed. Maybe airborne under the right circumstances. Maybe dormant in anyone who spent enough time near an infected environment. Maybe transmitted through blood in ways no one had studied long enough to confirm. Navarro would have had the answers once. She didn't anymore. She kept dragging herself closer. I watched her head jerk with each motion. The chair leg caught on her belt and scraped across the floor loudly enough to echo down the hall. If there were any stray infected outside, they would hear it. There were no guards left, no barriers, no one to stop anything from walking in. I should have shot her again. I should have cut the movement off. Instead, I found myself kneeling beside her. I wasn't gentle. I wasn't hesitating. I just needed to see her face one last time while it moved without thought. I tilted her head slightly to the side. Her eyes didn't focus. She didn't track me. She snapped her jaw once against her own shoulder in a directionless motion. I used the same handgun I had taken off the guard. One shot to the skull. Clean, practical. It wasn't anger. It wasn't satisfaction. It was maintenance. The same way I once handled broken tools or damaged equipment. When her body stopped twitching, I checked for any reaction. None came. She was gone again. This time, without any doubt. Something inside me shifted, not in a dramatic way. Just a quiet realization that the rules of this infection were even more unpredictable than we had assumed. Navarro had been in controlled environments for weeks. She had worn gloves around any possible contaminants. She had disinfected after every incident, and she still turned. That meant the virus didn't care about protocols. It didn't need the typical entry points. Any death could trigger it if the body carried the dormant strain. I sat on the floor next to her body again. This time I lasted only a few seconds before forcing myself to move. Staying near her felt pointless. I wasn't going to study anything. I wasn't going to learn anything useful. The only outcome was sitting beside a corpse that had already betrayed my expectations once. I turned away and walked toward the hall. Every sound the world made now felt unstable. Anybody left behind could come back. I collected what I could carry: canned food, ammunition, a water bladder, a coat thick enough to handle the cold nights. The bag felt heavy, but not in a way that mattered. I slung it over my shoulder and checked the small stash the guards had left behind. One of their rifles still worked, though the magazine was half empty. I took it anyway. I checked for noise outside. Nothing moved, no wind, no infected, just emptiness. I walked back into the room one more time. Navarro's body was still on the floor. It had not twitched, not rolled, not moved. The stain under her was darker now, spreading in uneven lines that looked more like a spill than a wound. I looked at her face for the last time, not searching for meaning, just marking the fact that she wasn't something chasing me anymore. I pulled the door shut behind me, dragged a shelf across it, jammed a broken pipe through the handle for good measure, and left her there. I didn't plan on staying in the building longer than needed. I wanted distance. I wanted the road. I wanted California. Outside, the landscape was the same as before. Dead vehicles, collapsed signs, cracked pavement, stray infected wandering through abandoned structures without purpose. I took a quiet route through the back lot and checked for movement. A few slow infected staggered toward the sound of my boots when I crossed the gravel, but they were spread out. I took them down one by one, fast and without hesitation. A cracked skull here, a blow to the temple there. No wasted shots. No noise that would draw more. My hands didn't shake. My breath stayed steady. There was nothing left inside me to break. I reached the main road and stared at the path stretching west. California was far. The infected were everywhere. Supplies were limited. But I had no obligation to anything else. No bunker, no project, no purpose. Home was the last place that still belonged to me, even if nothing human waited there. I stayed on the road because it was the only line that still meant direction. The map was already in my head, built from years of travel between properties, meetings, flight terminals, and the quiet drives where I tried to clear my thoughts without anyone asking questions. California sat in that memory like a stubborn checkpoint I could not erase. I kept walking, passing cars left at angles, some burned out, some with doors wide open. Most of them had no keys. The ones that did had dead batteries or empty tanks. I kept moving and told myself that distance would eventually turn into progress. Around midday, I found a sedan half buried in a shallow ditch. Smoke still trailed from the exhaust even though the air was cold. A door hung open. No bodies inside. Someone had left it in a hurry. The keys rested in the ignition. I didn't waste time. I checked the back seat for signs of infection. Blood, broken fingers, bite marks. Nothing that suggested a struggle happened inside. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the wheel. The engine hummed without complaint, a steady vibration that felt almost unfamiliar after weeks of silence and foot travel. The fuel gauge sat just above a quarter, enough to get me maybe 30 or 40 miles if the road stayed clear. I drove until the needle dropped low enough that the engine began to cough. When the car finally stalled, I rolled it as far as momentum allowed toward the side of the road, stepped out, and siphoned the last of the fuel into a container I found in the trunk. A few ounces at best, not enough to fill another vehicle, but sometimes even a few ounces were enough to coax an engine to life for a short stretch. When I was done, I left the car behind and continued west on foot. 2 days passed, with little to break the monotony. I kept count by the sun and the temperature swings. I ate sparingly. There was no reason to dwindle my supplies too fast. I drank from streams when I found them, and boiled water when I could afford to stop for longer than 10 minutes. My clothes stayed damp most nights. My boots rubbed at my ankles until the skin felt raw. Still, movement was better than staying in place. The more miles I covered, the more it became clear that someone out there was still organized. Early in the morning of the third day, I heard aircraft overhead. Not commercial. The noise didn't match anything I remembered from business travel. These were military or private, low altitude, slow passes. One helicopter circled the valley behind me, but it never dropped low enough to investigate the road. Maybe they were scouting for infected clusters, maybe clearing routes, or maybe they were the last remnants of people trying to hold on to whatever order was still left. The aircraft moved on quickly, leaving nothing behind but the fading thump of rotors. By late afternoon, I spotted a group walking along the right shoulder of the highway. A family, 2 adults and 2 children. Far enough ahead that they didn't notice me. Close enough that I caught fragments of their conversation when the wind shifted. They were discussing a safe zone somewhere south. The details didn't matter to me. Safe zone was just a phrase people clung to when they needed something to move toward. I didn't call out to them. I didn't want company. I didn't want responsibility. I kept my pace steady and maintained distance. An hour later, when the sun dipped lower, the road curved toward a narrow canyon. That was where everything fell apart for them. I heard the engine first, tires screeching on cracked asphalt. The vehicle came around the bend so fast that I expected it to flip. It didn't. It swerved directly into the family instead. The impact was loud and blunt. It knocked the father forward, threw the mother sideways, and sent the 2 girls collapsing onto the road. The car didn't stop. It skidded a few yards, fishtailed, and slammed into a guardrail. I didn't run toward them. I approached slowly, watching the dust in the air settle. Voices rose, angry and sharp. A man was shouting at someone inside the crashed car. Another voice barked back. Someone fired a weapon. The sound echoed through the canyon. Another shot followed, then another. When I reached a point close enough to see clearly, the mother lay on her back. Her breath came shallow. Blood spread across her clothes. Her eyes were focused on the sky as if she was searching for something above it. Two men dragged the daughters toward their own vehicle. The girls kicked weakly, their cries barely carried. The men didn't hesitate. They shoved them inside and slammed the doors. The father lay a few feet away from the mother. He wasn't moving. A bullet had taken part of his temple. I stood still and watched the men climb into their car and reverse out of the crash site. Their tires squealed. The car sped away, shrinking into the distance until it vanished around another bend. When the area was quiet again, I walked toward the mother. Her eyes shifted toward me, not with trust, just recognition that someone was there. She tried to lift her hand. It barely moved. Her head tilted a fraction toward the bodies of her family. When she opened her mouth, nothing came out. No final words. No plea. Just silence. A few seconds later, her expression went slack. The last bit of tension left her body. She was gone. There was no point in staying. I checked the father for signs of movement. None. Both adults were past saving. The road smelled of gasoline leaking from the crashed car, and the air felt thick with heat from the friction of the skidding tires. I considered burying them, but the ground was too hard, and I had no tools. Even if I tried, the work would take hours. I didn't have hours, not on an open highway that could draw infected any minute. A faint scraping noise came from behind the destroyed vehicle. I moved around it carefully, rifle ready. An infected crawled out from under the chassis. Its legs were crushed. Its hands reached at the air in slow drags. Its jaw clicked while it tried to pull itself forward. I stepped aside, raised the rifle, and fired once. The body went limp. The sound echoed through the canyon again, but no new infected appeared. I checked the pockets of the adults for anything useful. A lighter, some food wrappers, a child's drawing folded in the mother's coat. Nothing else. The drawing showed a son, 2 smiling parents, and 2 girls holding hands. It didn't belong in this place anymore. The daughters were already gone. The men who had taken them left no trace except tire tracks and red dust. I thought about going after them. Then I thought about Navarro's last breaths and the bunker and everything I had already lost. The idea of chasing unknown men who wanted to survive at any cost felt pointless. I had no obligation to the girls. I had no obligation to their parents. I turned away and continued west. The next 30 miles were quiet. I saw infected occasionally. One limping across the divider, another standing in the middle of the road turning its head in stiff motions. I avoided them when possible. When I couldn't, I handled them quickly. A few blows with the rifle stock, a jab with the knife. No noise unless absolutely necessary. I stayed focused on putting one foot in front of the other. I slept in abandoned sheds and under bridges when I found them. Not well, not deeply, just enough to keep my legs moving. Each night, I wondered if Navarro had been infected the entire time without knowing. If the virus had sat inside her quietly until her heart stopped. If it meant any death could trigger the same change. I had no answers. All I saw was the empty road, the vacant land, and the shadows of infected passing through fields with no awareness of anything except sound. On the morning of the 5th day, I found another vehicle. An old off-road truck with a cracked windshield and mud splattered across the doors. It had no keys, but I checked the sun visor on instinct. A spare key fell into my hand. The engine sputtered but started. The fuel gauge sat at 1/8, enough to push a little farther. Before I got in, I heard rustling behind a fence nearby. 3 infected forced themselves through a broken gap. They spotted me and started toward the truck in awkward strides. I climbed inside and started the engine fully. As the truck rolled forward, one of them managed to grab the passenger door handle. I swerved, scraping the infected body along the side of an abandoned trailer until the hand tore free. I accelerated until the figures disappeared in the rearview mirror. The relief of a working vehicle faded quickly when the engine sputtered less than 10 miles later. The truck rolled to a stop in the middle of a long, empty stretch of highway. I stepped out, shut the door behind me, and looked ahead. California was still far. The distance didn't matter anymore. I kept walking because there was nothing else left to do. The highway carried me west through a valley that used to be familiar. On normal days, this stretch would be packed with weekend traffic. Families heading to the coast, trucks grinding uphill, bikers weaving around each other in long lines. Now it was stripped clean. The road looked stretched and hollow. Every sound traveled too far. A coyote barked somewhere miles off, and it might as well have been next to me. California was close enough that I recognized the smell of dust in the air. Familiar dirt, familiar dryness. The kind that clung to clothes in summer and coated windshields in late afternoon. I walked without stopping until my legs felt unsteady. The sun sank behind the hills, and the light turned flat. The sky lost color. I saw the first sign of home when the road bent toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. A gas station, a few small shops, and a diner with a rusted roof. That place used to be crowded with bikers on weekends. Loud engines, loud music, and people who liked to drink until they forgot where they parked. I had stopped there a few times on long drives. The burgers were bad, but the staff was polite. Now the building looked hollow. The parking lot was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. 2 motorcycles lay on their sides near a cracked fuel pump. A car had burned down to a husk near the far curb. And the strangest thing, a patrol car sat smashed against the front entrance, the lights long dead, the windshield shattered. I would have kept walking, but the car that had taken the 2 girls was parked right beside the diner door. Same dents, same missing rear window, same streaks of dust and fingerprints. That meant the men who took them were inside. I didn't want another problem. I didn't want another responsibility. I had spent 90 days trying to destroy one path, and I had finally closed it. Navarro was dead, my family was gone, and I was heading home to bury whatever was left of myself. But as I stepped past the broken cruiser, a sound cut through the empty lot. A scream, high and sharp and panicked. A girl's voice, then another. Their tones overlapped, almost identical. I stopped and listened. The noise came from deep inside the diner. Someone hit something, furniture or a wall. Something heavy toppled over. A man shouted, then silence again. I counted my remaining rounds without pulling the magazine. I knew the number already. I kept my rifle angled low and moved toward the side window. The glass was smeared with soot and scratches. I wiped a section clean with my sleeve and looked inside. 7 men filled the place. A strange mix that didn't belong together. 2 were big enough to be former bikers. Tattoos, leather, heavy boots. 1 wore what looked like a chef's jacket, stained and torn. 2 were naked, pacing around the tables without shame. 1 man sat drinking beer in a wrinkled business suit. Another wore a woman's dress with smudged makeup, laughing at his own reflection in the window as he drank. It was a gathering pulled together by madness, convenience, or plain cruelty. No organization, just men who had decided that the end of the world gave them permission to treat others however they wanted. One of them dragged one of the girls toward the back hall. She fought with no strength left. Her legs barely held her up. The second girl tried to push away from another man who pressed himself against her near the counter. She swung her arms blindly and screamed until her voice cracked. The man just laughed. None of the others interfered. They watched like it was entertainment. The scene felt wrong in a way that didn't need words. I lifted the rifle, centered the iron sights on the man near the counter, and concentrated on the small space between his eyebrows. I didn't hesitate. I fired once. His head snapped back. He dropped instantly. Before the others could react, I shifted my aim to the man dragging the first girl and fired again. He collapsed halfway through the doorway. The girl fell with him and scrambled away. For a second, the room froze. Then chaos hit. The chef sprinted toward the kitchen with no plan. The 2 naked men grabbed whatever they could find. One took a broken chair leg. The other grabbed a rusted skillet. The business suit man reached for a handgun under a table. The man in the dress screamed and hid behind the counter. The two big bikers charged straight at the door where I stood. I tried to step back, but the first biker slammed into the frame so hard that the wood cracked. He swung a heavy fist. I dodged halfway. His knuckles cut across my cheek. I countered by slamming the rifle stock into his jaw. He staggered back, and the second biker lunged in. He tackled me into the doorway and drove me into the dirt. My shoulder hit the ground the wrong way. A sharp noise came from the joint. I felt the arm go loose. The rifle skidded out of reach. The biker pinned me. He punched downward again and again. I twisted my head enough to avoid most of the blows, but not all. Dirt kicked up around us. The chef came back with a knife. The naked man with the skillet rushed in from the side. I rolled under the biker's arm, grabbed a handful of gravel, and threw it upward. The biker flinched. That gave me enough room to punch the underside of his chin. He fell back. The chef lunged. I grabbed his wrist, twisted until the knife dropped, and shoved him into the biker. The business suit man fired from the left side of the diner. The shot tore across my upper arm. Not deep, but enough to send heat across the skin. I jumped behind the crashed patrol car for cover. Bullets hit the metal door. Chips of paint flew. I reached for the rifle with my good arm and crawled across the ground until my fingers touched it. When I stood again, the men were disorganized. The chef was on the floor. The first biker tried to get up but stumbled. The business suit man fired again, but the shot buried itself in the roof over my head. I aimed at him and shot once. He fell backward over a booth. The naked man with the skillet charged me. I sidestepped and hit him across the head with the rifle stock. He crumpled without a sound. The man in the dress tried to run out through the kitchen. I didn't chase. The biker pulled himself up one more time. His eyes looked empty. He charged with his arms open. I fired into his chest and he hit the floor hard. The room fell silent except for the sound of the girls breathing somewhere in the back. I leaned against the doorframe and waited until the dizziness steadied. My shoulder hung at an angle that felt wrong. I pushed it against the frame and forced it back into place. A dull crack echoed through my back. The pain caught me off guard, but I held still until it faded to something manageable. Inside the diner, the girl in the main room was still sitting near the body of the man I had shot first. Her face was blank. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her knees. Her sister had already escaped her attacker. She dragged his unconscious body against the wall and kept hitting his head with whatever object she found. A heavy metal canister. She didn't stop until her arms lost strength. She dropped the canister and stared at the floor. I approached slowly. I didn't want to scare them further. They did not look at me. They didn't speak. They sat close to the wall, both of them shaking, both looking like they had disappeared into themselves. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folded drawing I had taken from their mother's pocket. The paper was wrinkled and soft at the edges. I held it out. Neither of them moved. I placed it gently on the floor between them. I said only one thing, that I didn't know why I had carried it, but maybe I had walked this far just to give it back. Neither girl answered. One of them scooped up the drawing, pressed it to her chest, and rocked slightly. The other stared at her sister with red eyes. I turned away. My job here was done. There was nothing more I could fix. I stepped out of the diner, walked past the bikes and the burned-out car, and didn't look back. The sun hung low behind the hills. The road waited. I knew where it led. My house was still several miles west. A long walk, but not impossible. I carried my rifle across my chest and kept walking. By the time I reached the next mile marker, the sky had darkened. I felt the ache in my arm, the bruises across my ribs, the weight of everything that happened in the bunker and outside it. Navarro, the project, my children, my wife. I realized something then. Revenge had been the last piece of purpose I had carried. Killing Navarro had been the only thing giving me direction. Now that she was gone, I was just a man walking west with no aim except reaching a house that no longer contained a family. The world didn't care whether I made it or not. It didn't care who I used to be. Billionaire, husband, father, architect of bunkers and contingencies. All of that belonged to the past. I kept walking, one foot after another, because movement was all I had left. The girls would survive or they wouldn't. The infected would spread until nothing remained but silence. None of it could be changed by me anymore. The night wind picked up and pushed dust across the highway. I gripped the rifle tighter and looked ahead at the dark road stretching into California. Whatever waited for me there, emptiness or something worse, I would face it alone. I didn't have anything left to lose. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you, what moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel, especially with extra membership. Carlos Herrera, The Great Anywho, Jadala, Madam Midnight, Deborah Powell, William Blackwell. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares signing off.